Welcome to the Taming of Chaos on Bid Day. My name is Kyle Hamer and I am your host. We are very excited to present this show to you by A-Site Software. Joining us today is our presenter, Alan Crowley. Alan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Kyle.
We're excited to learn a little bit more about you, how we can improve Bid Day, get some hacks, tips, and tricks. But before we jump into that, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what brought you to construction?
Well, it's a long story, but the quick answer is I'm from the great state of Fort Worth, which is in the Republic of Texas, and I am a proud graduate of Texas A&M University out of the construction department, and I have built projects from Hawaii to Halifax.
Fantastic. So why don't we go ahead and get started today and just kind of walk us through what is the chaos of Bid Day?
Well, as everybody knows, it's chaos and it's hard to control, but we're going to go over three items today that we think you ought to take a look at. One is your bid day process. We'll walk through some of those things on ideas that we've had in the past and we've had other people comment on. Number two is make sure we have our scopes of work down. That's number two. Number three is the bid analysis process. How do you go about, if you're a general contractor, dealing with your subcontracts on bid day, subcontractor quotes on bid day, and if you're a trade contractor, how do you do the same thing with any material suppliers? So let's get going, Kyle.
Yeah, well, I think one of the first things we ought to do, though, is better understand where the audience is out and kind of where they're at in their own bid process. We've got a short poll here, which will help us get a good sense of what's going on. So you'll see pop up on the screen. Do you have a well-documented process for bid day? And the way Alan likes to describe it is it something you can hand to an intern, and can they do it without you? Just a few more seconds to respond here. Oh, we got our first yes, but predominantly so far, nobody's got it written down just yet, Alan.
Well, hopefully we can help that today.
All right, we're going to go ahead and end here. And as we can see, if we share the results here, Alan, looks like about 80% of people do not have a well-documented, written down process. So let's kick it off. Why is that a problem?
Well, it's a problem because that means most of the time you'll do stuff differently every time. And if you aren't in sync with how you want to do it every time, then you're going to probably step on something.
So, all right, step on something means I got a broken foot or at least a black eye, maybe because the board popped up and hit me in the face. What does an ideal bid day process look like?
Well, let's go to that next slide. I'm sorry, not slide, but the task list.
Oh, yeah, great.
One of the things you need to do is you need to document your process. What you see up on the screen is an example that somebody put together for how to set up your estimate task list. So whether you have a few tasks in your company's organization or you have 300, if you are a 2-person firm or a 200-person firm, you need to come up with whatever your tasks are. The suggestion is to make sure that they are documented, that they are assignable so that you can say that Joe is going to do item 1 and Fred is going to do item 3. Also, it's a great idea to give it a due date because not everything is due on the same day in bid day. And obviously what you can see, what we've done is it's really not about the chaos of bid day. It's getting you prepared to help with the chaos of bid day. So if you can fully develop your process, whatever that process is, and you can document it not only in a checklist format, but also to have a book, if you will. Imagine a 3-ring binder. We don't use those anymore, but imagine a 3-ring binder in your hard drive or C drive or wherever your company protocols are. And now you have that if task 1 is to create your estimate folder. So your backup document to your task list would give screenshots, would give a detailed description to a person off the street that you could come in. And when they are hired on, it's a great training tool, and it'll have screenshots. It'll have push button X, then click it and save in this button in this folder. And as you move down through all those tasks, you now have them documented.
Sounds like a lot of work.
It is a lot of work. But I think you'll find that if you create a list and you create a process and you start following that process, you will begin to make less and less errors on bid day, because how many times do we get up on bid day and we're like, oh, we forgot the toilet partitions, or we forgot to get a price on concrete. So if you have a checklist, at least you know you might be in trouble a few days before the bid day, which gives you a chance to take care of that.
So documenting the process, you talk about having a checklist, well documented, walking through the particular process. Beyond having it written down, what are the other elements that I need to think through to make sure that I'm prepared so that chaos doesn't actually, come in and wreck my day or wreck my bid?
Great point, Kyle. First, the task list recap. We just talked about an example of that a moment ago. We also described and talked about the detailed description that goes with each of those tasks. We talked about it should be documented. So whatever your documentation process is for your company, whether it's a binder or a fancy integrated accounting electronic system, it needs to be documented. And obviously, you're going to have a detailed listing of those tasks. Again, whatever those tasks are from day one. The salespeople brought in a new job at the church on the east side of town. So that task list says you need to find out what kind of permits are available or what type of permitting is not available. And if there are special inspections, whatever your task list are, make sure you detail them. And for gosh sakes, let's put them in sequential order so that as you're running through in the chaos of bid day and the process running up to bid day, it's chaotic for everybody. If you make them sequential, they're easier to follow through. And again, make sure they're assignments. Assign it to the front desk, whoever's going to collect certain things. If it's a public bid and you have to hard print it, make sure that's assigned correctly. And we've talked about due dates. The biggest thing you need to do is once you have this documented process is you need to review it periodically. You don't need to spend time after every bid that's due, but a lessons learned sequence would be great. Lessons learned meaning as soon as you finish something, let's sit down and take a few minutes and look at what did we do right, what did we wrong, what do we need to add, update that process and keep moving.
But beyond that, though, I mean, I think one of the things that you mentioned to me, and we don't necessarily get into often, or sometimes we don't think, is it's the 5 Ps, right? It's the prior planning prevents poor performance. What sort of things do I need to think about ahead of bid day, or what sort of elements do I need to prepare to ensure that not only am I going through and meeting the checklist, but I'm actually preparing a bid that could be a winning bid?
So one of the biggest things that we in our business don't pay enough attention to, in my experience in working with contractors and developers and owners around the country, is the scope of work. Because if you think about it, money doesn't matter if the scope isn't right. So if you've got an electrical bid that's $80,000 and you've got another one at $120,000, what tells you that the 80 is right or wrong? The scope of work will tell us that. So you really need to figure out in your bid day process and your bidding process is how to develop those scopes of work. We've met with people around the country, and some people just say electrical, so I'm going to put in here a transformer, lights, and switch gear. We've got other people that dig down into you need X number of outlets on the west wall on the room number 101. So you need to figure out what your system is to meet you between those two opposites. The best way to do that is to come up with some type of sheet that lets you take scope and develop scope per trade.
Like you have an example here. Is the concrete, yeah?
Yeah, this is a great example. This is a typical Excel spreadsheet that has multiple tabs for each trade. And we're going to concentrate on concrete with our short webinar today. So you can see that this particular one was developed, you're listing all the site activities that relate to concrete. Then you're going to look at your foundation activities. And if it's a multi-story building, obviously you're going to have concrete decks. You've got some interior activities. You've got miscellaneous things. Not every project has a truck dock, obviously. So you're going to create this list per project. Yes, it's time consuming. Yes, it's a pain, but our recommendation is to have that scope of work for every trade, for every project, and you will reap the rewards. Not only does it help you with your bid day activity, but it allows you to get into the subcontracting activity. You win the job. Now you've got the scope already decided. You've talked with each vendor about the scope, and it makes it easier for you to write their subcontracts versus just taking a bid and looking at the guy's scope of work and it's $300,000 and he says electrical. So you need a little more detail than that, obviously. A great benefit is when you sit down with the owner or the client and you can detail out your scope of work to help the client understand why your bid might be more money, but you've got the right scope.
That's where you talk about the details paying dividends. Why is that important? I mean, what is it that happens when I prepare a bid or go to this extra level of detail? How does that actually give me a winning advantage?
It gives you a winning advantage because you know what your subcontractor is supposed to price for you. Even if you do repetitive work like a Burger King or a McDonald's or a Walmart, having a detailed scope of work for every trade will help you analyze the bids better.
So with that, it sounds like there's a final step here in making sure that we're successful, which is what?
Our bid analysis system. So what is your bid analysis system? Then that means not your bid to the client, but we're specifically targeting your bid analysis for your trades. So how do you compare your concrete vendors amongst themselves? How do you compare your supplier quotes? How do you compare the quantities? So if you have two concrete people that are one's 4.2 million and one's 4.25 million, how do you know either one of them have the right scope? Just because they got the same number or they're pretty close in that large of a concrete project doesn't mean they're right. So using a tool to develop that scope and give yourself some quantities allows you a quick check at bid day you got the electrician on the phone who's apparent low, but you don't really know. You double check with him. You call him up and did you get the transformer on the third floor? Did you get those 14 light fixtures that are specialty made in Bangladesh that are stuck in the executive wing? So it gives you a tool to back check against what your subs are doing. And we can go back to, Kyle, our bid analysis spreadsheet that we had up a minute ago and look at that in our last. So one of the things you can do is you can use the top of this form for listing your vendors, whether it's a supplier or a subcontractor. And as you go down through the list and you're reading his bid, you can put a check mark by, oh, they forgot to excavate for the curbs, but they do have their freestanding curb. Oh, they forgot the curb cut for the apron, or they do have it. So as you finish that analysis, now you've got a pretty good visual reconnaissance of if the guy in the middle is $50,000 low, but he's missing a lot of the check marks, maybe he's really not low. It gives you a chance to give him a quick call and you don't have to focus on the whole bid. Focus on those lines that are not checked off. Maybe he did include them, but he forgot to tell you.
It sounds like this can be a bit of for depending on the scope of the project and the size of the project, sounds like it's more than a one-person job. What do you recommend as far as who's looking at the subs and doing the includes, excludes, and understanding the scope of work that's been submitted? Who is that? Just you? Is that a team? How does that work to keep it less chaotic on bid day?
Well, we use the same analysis that you don't want to have a person that is writing the checks, actually logging them into the checkbook. So if you've got a single person in your estimating department doing this, that person should have somebody looking over his shoulder or her shoulder, not because they're going to steal, but because it's hard on bid day because of the chaos. So now you've got, it's in your process, it's in your checklist, and now you have somebody that's going to look over somebody else's shoulder, double check the math.
If I'm a subcontractor and I'm sitting here and I'm listening to this and I'm thinking to myself, well, okay, great. This sounds like you're taking the perspective of GC. What are the things that I should be thinking about to prepare myself or my bids to make it easier for the person I'm submitting the bid to so that I'm the preferred vendor?
Well, I know most of these subcontractors in the audience and that I've talked to from coast to coast, they do not want to give out their quantities to the general contractor because they normally think, or in the past have thought, that that is giving away their competitive advantage. But truly, if you are a subcontractor that is honest and on top of the world, if you are declaring your quantities at bid time, maybe the subcontractor does not have quantities, but you are telling your client, which is the general contractor or the owner, if it's a direct report, you are declaring to them that you really know what you're talking about. It's not just per plans and specs, it's per plans and specs. And I included the 2 widgets on the 5th floor, and I included the gizmolator that's out in the site. That will make you a better subcontractor.
That's great. So we only have a few minutes left here. And before we get into questions, I want to know, are there any final thoughts for our team or things that, for those listening that really can help them control that chaos monster? I mean, we could spend hours digging into the best practices and great ways to use tools and prepare for bid day, but we have 20 minutes. So in 60 seconds or less, what are the things we should be thinking about?
Systems, methods, and procedures. SMP. That's what you need to think about. You need to have a process for this work. You need to have a system that backs up the process, and your methods need to be documented. So whatever your process is, if you don't have one written down, and as Kyle said in our survey, we had 4 out of 5 that responded that did not have it documented, spend a little time and document it. It's hard when you're out there busy and you're I don't want to use a chuck in the truck situation, but there's a lot of us that are small contractors. And if you spend the time to document your process, it doesn't need to be a 400-page PowerPoint, but it needs to be documented on the back of a 2x4 with a carpenter's pencil is a good start. And then just progress from there.
That's great. Thank you for that. All right. For those in the audience who have questions, we have just a couple minutes left here. If you have a question, drop it in the Q&A or in the chat, and we'll ask Alan here with the last couple of minutes we have. All right. The question is, if you can't see it, how do you manage controlling late bids and qualifying hours before bid submission? Also, is it beneficial to have a scope of qualification signed with bid submission? So let's answer that 2-part.
Yeah, the second part's easy. Absolutely. If you can get a vendor to actually provide you something that documents their scope, detailed, and they sign it, that's even a better deal. Working from coast to coast, I didn't get too many people that would sign it, but I got a lot of people that would attach it to their bid. They'd have their normal bid cover sheet, and they would attach our scope sheet detailed with check marks. How do you control late bids? You really can't control those. Those are out of your control. They're going to come in depending on the size of work. And if you are working out of town, you're going to have to spend more time making sure those local subs know that you're not a hit and run type of contractor. So having communication with your subs and somebody reaching out to them, reminding them with some type of electronic tool that will pound them via text or email to remind them it's coming. That's a great tool to have.
Fantastic.
Great question.
Thanks, Julie. Well, Alan, that brings us to close. It's been a quick 20 minutes here, and trying to get everything into one day. We'd love to have you back to spend more time digging in deeper into the systems, process, methods, SMP, the methods and the process. The items that we have here, we do have the two documents you shared. We do have the ability to share those out with everybody. Is that right?
That is correct.
Fantastic. So we'll be sending those out as well as a copy of this. If you have questions for Alan, don't hesitate to shoot them in. Or what's the best way for people to get a hold of you?
It's Core Services. It's corsvcs.com.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again for being here today, Alan. It's been our pleasure. I've been your host, Kyle Hamer, for A-Site. We are working on taming the world of bids, and thankful that we have smarter guys like you than me who've been there, done that, bought the t-shirt, and know how to, not end up with the black eye on Chaos Day.
Thanks, Kyle. Let's do this again.
All right. Sounds like a plan. Thanks, Alan.